Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Girl Dad Show. Today is another Girl Dad Talk, and in season 4, I have my fellow dads and brothers in arms, Nis and Eric, joining me to banter again about some awesome topics that are top of mind for me and top of mind for both of us, all of us, and hopefully it's something that's interesting to you. Today, we are going to talk about the iPad and what's known on the internet as the iPad kid generation, where we have kids being exposed to the iPad device and a screen during dinners and needs of time when you're busy. And we just want to go over some of these concepts and thoughts that are coming out and some of the pros and cons. There are some pros that I want to list out right now, and then we're going to open it up for dialogue. A couple of the things that are good about it are that what are the good things about it? Do you guys remember? Let me pull this up real quick. Sorry, I had my notes out and I still messed it up. Oh, that they can be very good tools for education and provide a more interactive experience for education and learning. The second thing is that it serves as an entertainment platform to keep them occupied during times of big needs and obviously adult things that we need to get done and make life work in this busier digital environment. And then the last thing is it exposes them to tech literacy, which is an obvious thing that they're going to need to survive and thrive in the future. Or is it? I'm not entirely sure, but that is one of the pros of it. Some of the cons that come with it is that excessive screen time can negatively affect a children's attention span, and it makes them very, very reactive to needing things immediately. Their second is there's a lot of studies being done right now about the health issues of overusing iPads, leading to just physical problems like visual optic damage, and contributing to over health and its correlation with even obesity. And then lastly, kids also become heavily dependent on it and almost use it as a crutch and need it versus being able to interact with the world. So those are some of the pros and cons, and I'm going to stop for a second and open it up for discussion. Either one of you guys want to chime in here on any of those thoughts and what you think about iPads for your kids?
I'm kind of anti iPad for kids.
Are you? Why?
I I think that all the things you said sound pretty true.
Yeah.
But I think like when people start saying things like, "Oh, it could be good for education," or "It could improve tech literacy," these like feel like kind of theoretical and kind of incremental, and almost like justifying because of the other thing you said was like sort of it's convenient for parents if you got to do some shit. And I'm like, I think those are ways that parents are justifying putting their kids in front of a digital babysitter. And I think that's valid, right? But I think if you start telling yourself that you're doing it because it's better for the kid, it leads to different places. And like, nobody can tell me that like a generation of children that they've tested this against that has definitively produced better outcomes. So while they might learn a thing or something like that, like there's also other ways to learn things. So I think what it really comes down to is trading off parent convenience against sort of like all these other evils like behavioral or like the mental health thing or whatever. I can't be convinced, for example, that not introducing your kid to an iPad when they're 3 will disadvantage them from a tech literacy perspective.
Oh, really?
I
I,
would
I
be very hard pressed to believe that. Nor do I think that evidence exists.
my
Well,
my
none of us had them at 3, so I
That's
don't know if that
true.
would disadvantage from a tech perspective.
That's true. That's very true. I guess for me, the one of the things that I really like about those points is that, my wife is very on the extreme side of not having technology. She doesn't like watching TV is like a treat. They have to like do things and get points to even watch TV, let alone like get iPad time. So it's a big deal when they get iPad time, right? I, on the other hand, like I think it's part of life because I just need them to be ready for it. And so the few times I'm left alone with the kids, they already know we're either going to the arcades or we're going to be doing iPad time, right? And I'll do it with them, right? I'm right there with them watching movies and stuff. But here's the reason why I think that it's acceptable in moderation and necessary as part of life, is because when we don't give them soda, we don't give them candy and drinks, and we had this whole like holistic like style of like living with our kids, and then we started going out to birthday parties and stuff. These kids would be a wreck because they've never had like Capri Suns and like sugar foods, and we're like, what are we doing? It's like that we can't avoid this forever. And so I'm not saying we have to like engorge in that, but we definitely need to expose them to these things because it's a natural part of what they're going to deal with, and teaching them how to interact with it is more important to me than trying to be binary about it, right? So that's my thesis on it.
I think that what you're saying is not inconsistent with what I'm saying. I don't. I think that no iPads forever is also a poor choice, right?
Mm.
I think that when people start saying things like it'll improve tech literacy or like it'll advantage them in education, I think we just haven't had iPads long enough with children long enough to even really be able to support those claims. So it strikes me as things that people say to justify the fact that they're going to try to do it a lot.
Mm.
I agree with you. Like the all or none is probably the wrong approach, and I don't want to like make a big deal about it with my kids. I agree that it'll be a part of life, but like if a kid gets an iPad at 5 instead of 3, I don't think that kid will become tech illiterate.
Nis, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree largely. I was going to talk about kind of exposing them because you don't want the first time they get it to be like, kind of like sugar. Like the first time they get cake is at like some 8-year-old birthday party, and then they have a sugar high for the 2 days. So I think I do agree with that. I also would just point out that there are a lot of different things you can do with an iPad. So, I think very big difference if you're letting a kid play like kind of one of those like very high frequency dopamine games versus potentially watching Sesame Street. Like those are two very different things. So I would also, opt for controlling what they are exposed to in that medium.
So are you also saying in moderation? Is that kind of where you're going with?
Oh, definitely in moderation. I think it's more about exposure than it is like part of like their daily activity. Like I think, with our 2-year-old, it's probably about an hour a week in total of like video time, right? And it's pretty much Sesame Street, right? And it was like we used it for helping him relax for potty training. We used it for like, if it's at Texas, it's 102 degrees out. There's literally nothing else to do. He's been outside all day. He's passing out. It's not bedtime yet. Like, all right, he can watch 15 minutes. So it's usually things like that. But it's like highly controlled. Like he's not touching that screen, and he's not like, or he can call a family member. He really likes that on FaceTime. Like we let him FaceTime with a family member. He can hold the phone. He understands how to end the call. He loves ending the call. So whenever it's time to say goodbye, he knows how to do that. So it's like, I think like you're getting the tech literacy, but he doesn't think of the phone as a casino. And I think that's like kind of a major difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I maybe said like I'm kind of anti iPad. I mean, anti iPad as a crutch. I'm not anti iPad as a thing that exists in the world. Like, I think
Mm.
that, I I don't really see a huge advantage to being like let's make a choice to introduce iPads at 2. Like I don't think that telling all Americans that this is what you should do with your kid, I think that's probably a bad choice.
Mm.
I have a friend who is a chef, and they eat like whole foods and whatever, and they cook at home. And I remember I saw him at the gym, and their daughter had a cookie, and I was like, oh hey, what's your position? Like it's a CrossFit gym, like that whole thing. And I was like, oh, how do y'all do this? How do you handle it? He's like, look, we just don't have it at home. We also don't make a big deal about it. If she goes out and she has a cookie, it won't be the end of the world. And I think for me, like that reshaped how I felt about things that like they exist on a spectrum. You know that all of it is bad, but like none of it can also feel like this weird pressure for both the parents and for the kid. And I was like, oh, you guys have a really healthy attitude around that. And I think that I have a similar attitude towards iPad.
Yeah, I mean, my only thing about this too, and this is totally going on the extreme, guys, right? So just bear with me and let me finish. I also don't know if my kid's going to be some like $2 million a year professional gamer. Like there's no marker saying that they're not going to be that person, right? Because like I think about like how much I love StarCraft and Warcraft growing up, and if I would have been one of those people if I just pursued it, right? Because there's these gamers that are just making tons of money, they make a great living, and they have a great life doing this thing. And who am I to stop my kid from doing that? It's a question that I'm not thinking about often, but in just full transparency, I think about that. I'm like, who am I to say what the world's going to be like in the next few years? And that's the way that they make money and a living. And I think back viscerally about how much I enjoyed playing those games and how into it I got. And I just wonder, like, am I limiting that because, I just wanted to stop them from these things that I assume are bad that haven't been proven yet?
I think you could even expand the scope from there because like we all use computers for work. Our kids can't necessarily like, or at least my kids can't really understand that entertainment is the only form of activity they have, right? So they don't really understand work, but like they're going to see computers and screens for the rest of, their childhood, no matter what. So I think like the reality is like they are going to be exposed. So you just try to make sure that exposure is positive rather, or at least neutral rather than negative.
Yeah.
So even if they don't become like, pro gamers, they're going to have to realize that there are people who are touch screens all day for a living.
That's right.
Yeah, Nis, I think you made a really good point about the fact that iPads do a lot of things. Like watching Sesame Street on an iPad versus playing Candy Crush are different activities. Or like using it as a piano lesson tool, or chatting with your grandparents versus like just button mashing. And I
Yeah.
think if you separate out the activities, you could be like, okay, well, my kid's playing 14 hours of StarCraft. How do I feel about that, right? And that's distinct from like, well, like just treating the iPad as a single tool device or a single use device, I think is an error. And just thinking about instead like the actual function that it's achieving at the time.
I would also add to that like, you know, a lot, and this has been a theme for a lot of the conversations we've had is like, there are prerequisites here. Like if you don't have anything else for your kids to do at home and all you have is an iPad, like good luck having them not use the iPad repeatedly. But like if you have, like we have like a water station on our balcony where like he can play with water and sand and Play-Doh and like we have a bunch of other activities. And so, there are alternatives. If you haven't designed an experience for your kids with any alternatives, then like the iPad seems like more than a crutch. It seems like the only option.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Let's do final thoughts on just kind of where we stand on this, and then we'll wrap this one up real quick because I feel like we're getting to a good conclusion here. Eric, do you want to start?
Sure. Honestly, this is really great for me because it's helping me frame how I'm thinking about it. And I think as a result of talking to you guys today, like I'm thinking that sort of iPads and pretty much everything like lives on a spectrum from like tool to addiction.
Hmm.
And I don't think there's like a right number of hours or even like a right number of right like category of usage or whatever. But I think that you can probably look at your kids and evaluate, hey, is this in the realm of tool, like useful tool, or in the realm of harmful addiction? And I don't think there's a clear, bright line. I think that you'll have to make a judgment call. And right now I think that's how I'll probably approach it. I'll probably, because I'm like a Luddite, lean towards less iPad, but I don't know. I think there's no right answer. It's just what are you optimizing for?
Nice. Nis, you want to go
So
next?
yeah, I have a weird corollary to my own life. So I have a weird childhood in which I spent a significant percentage of my childhood in casinos. My family has worked in the casino industry for a long time. My dad works in the casino industry. So I've gone to every casino in Vegas since I was a baby, many, many times. So people always ask me like,
Amazing.
oh, do you gamble all the time? The opposite. It's like so passe and boring to me. And since my family are in the industry, I know you are not going to win as the player because they work for the house. So I think like whatever you can do for anything that, you know, can potentially be an addiction, if you can expose, like it's always hard to tell kids like don't do this now because in 20 years you're going to regret it. Like that's forever away for them, right? But anything you can do to just be like, hey, listen, these things exist out there. We're going to expose you to it. Here's why it's like not a great thing to be a degenerate, and then just kind of make it boring by a certain age. I think that's ideal. Like I would, in this context, I would say like if you can show them that there are so many other things that are much more fun and rewarding than the iPad, then you don't end up having such an issue when they're a teenager.
I love that. Really good. And then just to bring us home, I'm not gonna say anything about all the stuff that you guys say because I agree with everything, but I will say that for me, it's just a combination. I think that because my wife is so extreme on it, like she's really, really like big into like being outside, playing with the dirt and like gardening and like sports and all those things. I feel like I have a lot of leeway to use it, and because the cross section is going to be somewhere in the middle, which I think is really what we're talking about. And for me, it's moderation, and I have to act as that moderator that can kind of expose them to it. So I'm kind of blessed in a lot of ways that my wife chose that side of the extreme, in my opinion. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for being on here and talking about this. I know it's one of those controversial topics. I appreciate you guys putting yourself out there and being here with me on this show to talk through these things. It's really interesting for me as well to learn, and I always appreciate you guys spending your time with me.
Likewise. Thanks for having us, Sam.
See ya.
Thanks, guys. Talk soon.